Hi, I'm Skipper Chung Warson. I'm a service designer, workshop facilitator, and leadership coach at How This Works Co. Thanks for listening to the second season of the How This Works show. Are you curious about how people become top-notch in their field? On this show, I interview folks about how they got started in some particular line of work, where they are now, and key moments in between. Today, I'm talking with Joanne Weaver, who co-runs a design recruiting agency in the New York City area. We'll talk about her background, as well as her take on the design job market today, what it means to be looking for a job, along with some advice. Joanne, I appreciate you joining me.
Oh, thanks, Skipper. Thanks for having me. So glad to be here.
So as we do with all of our guests, we're going to start with some opening questions. And I said something about your area of expertise, but could you build on that with your own introduction?
Sure. Yeah. So I basically have two separate lives. The main life that I think we're talking about today is my design recruitment expertise. So I run the Joanne Weaver Group.
Yep.
Started it in 2007. So we're on year number 17. And I co-run it with Rebecca Levy, who's been with me since 2010.
Okay.
And we're basically a boutique recruitment agency based in New York, but we have national reach.
Okay.
And we recruit people that do UX and product design, which is kind of like the sexy if you think about it that way, but it's like the buy this shiny product kind of design. It's like more the functional utilitarian part of digital design. So that's our main focus. We also do product management, user research, and content strategy, which are all, kind of tech-specific roles. But what we're going to talk about today is going to be more universal about people's job search and interview process. And, I'm an educator in some ways, like, me and Rebecca will go to design schools in the area, give portfolio critiques.
Okay.
I do a live stream every other week called Design Unfiltered on LinkedIn every other Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. So that's kind of one side of what I do.
Sure.
And then the other side of what I do is I'm a singer.
Okay.
I'm a singer and performer and songwriter. So I've made some albums. I've made some music videos.
Okay.
Yeah, I perform on stage regularly at the Flatiron Room. And I've been in some, an indie pop band called Broanne. That was really, really fun. So kind of a mix of like performance art and just, kooky stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a specific style of music so you talked about like indie rock, but is there a specific style of music that you gravitate towards?
I mostly sing jazz.
Okay.
So my first two albums were called Interstellar Songbook and Interstellar Songbook 2.
Okay.
And that's a mix of American songbook classics. So jazz songs from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And then I mixed it with trip hop.
Okay.
Which was my favorite genre from the 90s. So that's like Tricky and Morcheeba and Massive Attack.
Word is Dead.
Exactly. Yep, you got it.
Yeah.
And then also mixing it with sci-fi. And I was really intrigued by the golden record that went out in the Voyager probes in the 70s, where it's got the sounds of Earth that went out there. And so I loved the movie Contact. I just love the idea of we're sending out radio waves and sending out sound waves to the cosmos. And can anybody hear us? And so that was the inspiration for those albums.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're going to get to a part of the show at the end where you talk about where you can be found. But
sure.
Is your music available on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon?
Yeah. I think it's on all of those. I know it's on Spotify for sure.
Okay.
I perform under my name for the Interstellar Songbook albums.
Okay.
Broanne was my indie pop band. So we have an EP called We're Totally Blowing Up, which was ironic because we actually kind of blew up as a band. We imploded as a band shortly after we released it.
Right.
But it was a fun ride. It was a wild ride. I'm really proud of that album. And then I've also done something called Twisted Spritzer, which I think is also out in the interwebs. And that was... You like the name?
I do like it. The play on Twisted Sister. And I imagine like a spritzer, like a drink, cool, cosmopolitan jazz. Was it jazzy?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was actually so I grew up on like 80s hair metal.
Okay.
Like I was a huge Guns N' Roses, Skid Row, Metallica fan, kind of late 80s, early 90s. So it was taking all these Def Leppard, can't forget to mention Def Leppard. So I took all of these like 80s metal songs that I loved and then made them into like jazzy, loungy versions, which actually came from a conversation on a stoop in Lower Manhattan where I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if like Rats Round and Round was like round and round, like kind of cheesy chassis style. And the guy that I was talking to was like, that's awesome. And then that just bore, Twisted Spritzer.
Interesting. You've tapped into something that is actually a hobby and love of mine, which is cover songs specifically. And when you take a song that is of a specific genre and has become famous in that genre, then to switch genres, whether you're slowing it down or speeding it up or, whatever the change you're making to it, the fundamental change that you're making to it, it reinterprets the song. The first one that comes to mind is like Ryan Adams' Wonderwall, the cover of the Oasis song. And the Gallagher brothers, who are nothing if not lots of ego and puffed upness and all of those things. I think I read somewhere that they had said, and I think it was Liam who said that he'd never understood Wonderwall until he heard Ryan Adams' version, and he had slowed it down. He made it acoustic. He made it, instead of like the pop song that it was.
Oh, how interesting that somebody who wrote the song didn't get it until somebody else put a mirror to him to show a different way. I love that. Right. I love that. That's great.
Well, let's get into the meat of the show.
Yeah.
This has been a great introduction. So I mentioned it a bit in the show's intro, what we were going to talk about, but I want to hear it from you. What subject do you know an awful lot about that we're meant to talk about today?
I come from the tech world. So I've been in tech for 25 years now. So I started in the late 90s.
Okay.
And then I've been a recruiter for 21 years.
Okay.
So I thought we'd talk about the things that I see from where I sit as a recruiter, how, and this is very general. It doesn't have to be people in tech necessarily, but it's how to put your best foot forward in the job search, maybe some interview strategies, what's happening in the industry right now. The tech world, I think, is a microcosm of a bigger world too.
Sure.
So I think just giving my perspectives on, like best practices, like how to land that job or just how to think about your job that you're in already.
Yeah. Well, let's start sort of at the beginning, because I'd love to hear how you got started in this work. As you said, you've been in tech for 25 years? Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Been in tech for 25 years. And then the Joanne Weaver Group is 17 years old, almost old enough to vote now. But,
Yep.
But so I'd love to hear how you got started. How did you become interested in this work? What led you to start working as a recruiter?
Yeah. So, nobody dreams when they're a little kid, like, oh, I want to be a recruiter. It's like any job that like your parents don't understand what you do, you're kind of like, how did I fall into this? So I think, a lot of recruiters come at it from so many different walks of life. And I still have to explain to my mom, like, what is UX? What is a recruitment? She's like, I need to know what to tell my friends. So, just for some definitions up front. So, a recruiter is somebody, people call them a headhunter, right? So it's like, I'm basically matching a client, which is the company that wants to hire somebody for a job. I'm matching them with the candidate, which is what we call the job seeker. So we're basically the go-between between the client and the candidate. So we'll, get a job in from the client. We'll do lots of intake. Then we'll find the people to fill the role. We'll do intake with the candidate, make sure it's a good match. And then we'll see them through the entire process, through all the interview processes, through to final offer, negotiating their offer, et cetera. Sometimes companies have an in-house recruiter. So, like any company you can think of will have recruiters that work just for them, who are looking to fill their internal roles.
Sure.
And then a third-party recruiter or an outside recruiter like me, we are separate from the hiring company. So it's my agency. So it's me and Rebecca that are working at the Joanne Weaver Group.
Sure.
And then we'll work with multiple companies looking for all sorts of different people that fall within our niche.
Yeah.
So we'll be working with like multiple jobs, multiple companies at the same time.
Okay.
So in terms of how I got into it, that Steve Jobs talk about connecting the dots and like, you don't see how certain things in your life are going to connect until they connect.
Sure.
So I think I always knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So that was really strong in me from a young age. So my dad had his own architecture firm. My uncle had his own endodontist practice. So I would just do these really harebrained ideas when I was young, like, I think it was fifth grade. I totally plagiarized like Good Housekeeping. It was like I was super obsessed with tanning because this is the 80s. And so I like literally copied down like their tanning tips, and then I rebranded it as Joanne's tanning tips.
Sure.
And I like went into class and I had this sign up list like, do you want Joanne's tanning tips? It's only 25 cents. And I was going to like photocopy this and like send it, give it to people. And then it's like, the little clipboards going around the classroom. And I'm like, oh gosh, I'm going to make all this money. Like, wow, look at all these people. And then I get the clipboard back and like nobody signed it.
Oh no.
But it, obviously didn't deter me. But it was just,
you kept going.
Yeah. Just like little like things like that. Like I was always thinking about like, how can I make money? And like money was always really important to me growing up. I just kind of thought of it as like freedom and power and like, oh, I can do my own thing. And so I think that was kind of, the seed that was planted that I wanted to do my own thing.
Mm-hmm.
Then at college at UC Berkeley, I was in a sorority. So a big part of being in a sorority is recruiting. So recruiting people through Rush. I think they call it something different now, but this was like the mid 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So I was, recruiting members to join our sorority, Chi Omega. I was always really good at connecting with people quickly, like especially one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'd have these gals come through, they'd call the walls.
Okay.
That would be really hard to open up and talk to. And they'd always send me in like, okay, send in Joanne to talk to the walls. Cause I was always really kind of, I think it takes a certain amount of empathy and curiosity just to like see like what's going on behind who you are. So I was able to draw people out of their shells. And that was actually something really valuable that I learned in that process is that when people seem cut off or stuck up or like better than you, oftentimes they're just scared or just like not comfortable in the situation.
Right.
So that was a good lesson. So, I'd say the sorority was kind of my first taste of recruitment. And then after I graduated, I did an exchange program to go to London, a program called BUNAC.
Okay.
And I literally like walked in this room and there's all these 3x5 cards of like different jobs you could take. And it was like, oh my God, like my life could go in all these different directions. Like was like a visual representation of like, where I could go. And I picked this card that was at a domestic recruitment agency called Greycoat Placements, based in the heart of London. And they placed nannies and butlers and gardeners and chauffeurs, live-in cooks, live-out cooks, governesses, in the homes of the rich and famous. And actually, speaking of the Gallaghers, they were a client, as a matter of fact.
Interesting.
I think it's long enough that I can reveal that. It's been lots of years past.
Right.
So I started as a receptionist, and the owner took a shine to me and eventually promoted me into the nanny desk. And so that was my first taste of like proper recruiting.
I see.
And I really loved it. It was like, oh, there's a need over here.
Yeah.
And I'm getting to know this person and their likes and dislikes and their personality and their vibe. And then I'm filling the need by meeting all these people. And these were like nannies that were coming from like the Midlands and Scotland and all these places where they would go to like nanny school. So it was like these, it was a very stratified society socially. So I'd be meeting all of these nannies and placing them with these like super wealthy people in London. And I just found it fascinating. I mean, from a cultural perspective, but also just like from the matching perspective.
Sure.
So that was really fun. And then when I came back to the States, I thought I was actually going to open up my own nanny agency because I got the taste of what that was. And I also just wanted to be an entrepreneur.
Sure.
But then I got a call, actually, ironically, from a recruiter that said, hey, there's a receptionist spot at this, tech company in San Francisco. I'm from the Bay Area.
Oh, okay.
Like, would you want to go interview? And there's stock options. And I'm like, okay, what's a tech company? What are stock options? And okay, sounds good.
Sure.
I got that job. And this was like my MO is like getting the receptionist job and like finding out who was cool and like where I wanted to go and like who's doing what. So I actually ironically interviewed for the recruiting team at Scient. That was the name of the .com. And it wasn't a match.
Okay.
And so I actually did not get into recruiting then, which looking back, that was okay. It was just a different culture than I think.
Okay.
Yeah, just not really my tribe. Yep. So I think that was actually a really good thing.
Okay.
So I moved into HR. I did a very creative job, like making people feel good about working there. It was just about connecting with people and making people feel good. So it was great. And then when the bottom dropped out of the .com world, I followed a singing dream because, everything in San Francisco was just tumbleweeds going down Market Street. Like there was just nothing happening.
Right.
And so me and a friend that I met from Scient were like, hey, let's go to the big city and like, follow our singing dreams. And so I did that in 2001.
Okay.
9/11 happened right afterwards.
Right.
Got some odd jobs, bartending, waitressing. And then I would say my big break was waitressing at this Midtown banker bar.
Okay.
It's not open anymore, but it was these regulars. These two women would come in all the time, and I was friendly with them.
Okay.
But then it was one day where they're like, "Hey, we need to get back to the office. We're running late." So I was like, "Oh, what do you guys do?" And they're like, "Oh, we're recruiters." And I was like, "Oh, I was a nanny recruiter back in the day." And oh gosh, I'm like working 80 hours on my feet, like working between that restaurant and the Blue Note because I wanted to make some jazz connections,
Sure.
but I was on my feet all the time.
Sure.
They're like, "Oh, we have a receptionist job open. You want to interview?" I was like, "Well, that sounds familiar." And so I did that.
Okay.
And I just learned everything. I learned about how to talk to clients. I was petrified to talk to clients at first. I was so huge imposter syndrome. I learned how to make contracts, how to talk to candidates, how to make my conversations really efficient. That was a cool job because they're like, here's a desk, here's a phone, here's a computer, get some clients or else you're fired.
Sink or swim.
Sink or swim. Yeah. Right. And so it was a great testing ground because it really shows you like, okay, are you resourceful enough to like be a good recruiter?
Right.
You have to like prove yourself from day one. And so I did.
Can we pull something out of what you just said? So earlier when you were talking about recruiting for the sorority and you said one of the reasons why you are often pegged as a person who spoke really easily to people you didn't necessarily have a lot of information about, that you didn't know very deeply. And yet in this scenario that you're describing as a new recruiter, you felt petrified, even though you seem to have, you have an ease in which you connect with other people, and yet you were scared.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say more about, maybe a little bit about that disconnect there?
I think because money was on the line. I think it was because I'm going to get paid to do this if I do it well.
I see.
And it's my job, like at the sorority, wasn't my job. It was just part of what you did by being in a sorority.
I see.
So it's kind of like, oh, if I'm just able to do it naturally, then great. But I think when all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's my job. I'm supposed to be good at this. I'm supposed to lend confidence with the client that I know what I'm doing. That was tough. And actually, talking about imposter syndrome even further, I had worked at that job at that staffing agency in New York. It was called Gainer Staffing. I was there for 4 years. So by the time I left, I was, a good earner. I was, a proven entity. I was good at what I did. And then when I went out on my own, there was a job I did in between at Razorfish as a national UX sourcer. And then I went full time into my own thing. Okay. But my first client meeting that I had as my own kind of business owner, I was also petrified, even though I totally knew what I was doing, but it was my own shingle.
I see.
I'm like, oh, and it was kind of that feeling of like, who am I? What gives me the right to do this, to like claim that I know what I'm doing? Sure. And it was a friend's company. And so she was there. So it put me somewhat at ease. But it was just, I think with anything in life, I think if you're anxious about something or it feels uncomfortable, I think sometimes that can become your strong suit. Right? It's just like doing it more and more and more, not avoiding it and just jumping in and just doing it.
Yeah. And to your point, I think that this idea that stage fright, nerves, imposter phenomenon, imposter syndrome, whatever you want to call it, how it only happens to certain types of people, I don't think that's true. I think these things happen for everyone. However, some people are better at getting over that initial hurdle.
I mean, how about you? Like, did you feel like when you started your podcast, did you feel like, oh my gosh, like I'm a podcaster now, like this feels weird? Or what was your journey?
Thank you for asking. And I'll try to keep this brief because I think the main subject matter is about you. But when I first started, I tried really hard to not talk. This is going to sound ludicrous, but I was at an agency, and I know you've actually worked with them before because I've heard you mention it on Design Unfiltered, but I was at Fjord once upon a time.
Oh, yeah.
And, this was in 2014, 2015, somewhere in there. I thought, well, there aren't a lot of design podcasts. I know Debbie Millman's podcast, Design Matters, but it's not about product design. It's about branding and other kinds of creative design work. So I had this idea to start a podcast in the studio. And so the first 5 episodes, I mean, the equipment was shit. One of them we recorded on a phone. But the first 5 episodes, I wanted to sit in the room to help guide the conversation, but I didn't want to talk. So I made other people, like I would listen to things that they were saying. Maybe they were talking about, a voice UI paradigm or, something to do with user research. And then I would say, okay, Michael, you asked Neve this question. And Michael's like, why am I asking Neve this question? You should ask Neve this question. And I'm like, no, I don't want to talk. I want this to be a conversation that you all are having. So, but it's so funny how we put ourselves into certain places and we want to do a thing, but we don't want to do this other thing because whether we think we're good at it or we think we don't speak well, whatever that thing is, it's funny how those things bubble up.
Yeah. And I think if you have heat around something, like if you have strong emotion towards something that you really, really don't want to do, I think that's really interesting information. I mean, I'll say anecdotally in my own life, I feel like the things that I've had the most anxiety and nervousness around, it means that there's some sort of desire there or there's like an opportunity there. If you didn't care, you wouldn't be nervous about it.
Sure.
Right. I had this friend once that said, if you really dislike somebody, like that person can actually become a good friend. But if you feel neutral about somebody, like maybe not.
Yep.
And so performing to
the
me
love
too.
hate paradigm.
Yeah, right. Like it's a strong emotion that I think can turn into something else. And, also too, when I was releasing Interstellar Songbook in 2012, and I knew I was going to have to put it up on stage for my record release party, I was nervous for months. I really didn't want to do it.
Sure.
And it was a great show. Tons of people came. It was like one of the best nights of my life. I was so nervous. I could barely even walk across the stage. Of course, I was wearing these crazy heels and I was all glamour puss. But it wasn't until I got this regular gig at the Flatiron Room, which was every Friday night for 3 hours, like weekly for like a year and a half. Like that was like my Hamburg, like the Beatles Hamburg, right? It's like that's where I just like workshop stuff.
Yeah.
And I was in front of an audience every week. And then I learned to love performing. And now I love it.
Yeah.
So I'm picking up what you're dropping about what you're saying. Yeah, I get it.
So let's dive back into your work as a recruiter in San Francisco. When do you decide to start your own agency?
Yeah. So in San Francisco, I wasn't a recruiter. I was working in HR. I didn't get into the recruiting team.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So when I moved to New York,
okay,
and then started working at the staffing agency, that's when I started doing recruiting. And then I specifically got into UX.
Okay.
Because a client wanted an information architect, which is what they called them back in 2003, which is now a UX designer or product designer.
Sure.
And so I literally went on Monster and the first person I found got the job. And I was like, hey, this is fantastic. And plus I just always liked UX people. Like I worked with UX people in the .com in San Francisco.
Sure.
And I didn't really totally understand what they did, but I knew that they were like cool and dressed awesome. And they were just really nice people, like very empathetic people that I just jived with really well. So it was just a natural fit.
Got it.
And so when I left that job, I took a job at Razorfish as a freelance UX sourcer for them nationally. So that's when I really dove into UX as a discipline.
Got it.
And that was also great too, because Razorfish had a huge name. So all of a sudden, like people were like knocking down my door to talk to me when before I was chasing people.
Right.
So I met a ton of UX contacts. So that was really like a great training ground to just build my network and really just, kind of ask that community, what do I need to do to recruit for you effectively? And because it's such a wonderful, beautiful, warm, welcoming community, they took me under their wing and like taught me like, here's a wireframe, like here's all these artifacts that UX people make. And here's here's what questions you should ask us. So I'm forever indebted to them for that. So that's where I learned kind of the UX trade. And then Microsoft bought Razorfish for Avenue A for like $6.2 billion. That was like 2000. It was like this crazy thing. And I was on the phone with this friend of mine from Science and I was like, oh shit, I just got this email saying that we just got purchased. And he's like, oh shit. He's like, you should go to the office and like make some friends right now because your ass is going to be grass. And I was like, oh my God. Okay. So anyway, but I got laid off, and I really want to underscore this because I think now in the industry, so many layoffs are happening. Like the past year and a half, it's been so rich with layoffs.
Yep.
But a layoff can be a really good thing. And I know that might sound kind of disingenuous because there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of angst out there, especially if people are laid off for a long time. So I'm not,
Sure.
I'm not glossing over the realities of the pain of the situation.
Yeah.
But so I really do firmly believe that when a door closes, a window opens.
Sure.
And, because of that layoff, that's when I opened up my own agency.
Got
And
it.
that's a beautiful thing, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
unbeknownst to me, I opened it right before the huge 2008, crisis, like financial crisis. So,
Right.
but also too, and, I think people that are coming into the industry now, I think that's also a beautiful thing because
Yeah.
it's kind of like you have to learn how to drive stick
Yeah.
by coming into such a tough industry. So it's like the habits that you and the practices that you put in place now, to get that job, to build your business, whatever it is, like those are going to be skills that you're going to take with you for the rest of your job. And then when times are easier, it's going to feel so much easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Simon Sinek talks about opening his agency, I think, just before 9/11 happened.
Mhm.
And, for people who want to start something, the best time to start something is now. And part of that is, sure, right before 9/11 or right after 9/11, housing crisis, financial crisis, dot-com bust, all of these things happen. But when you start this thing that you want to do, it might be that it's really hard and it's hard to get traction, but then maybe a lot of other people aren't starting a thing, right?
Mhm.
And if you start during prosperous time, if you start during when times are really good, then a lot of people are starting their own thing.
Yeah.
So then you're having to deal with competition. So I think whatever time it is for you to start something, now is a pretty good time to do it.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I was listening to, there's a Peloton instructor named Tunde.
Okay.
And I was listening to her audiobook last night and she was talking about, her rise into Peloton. And she said something, I'm probably going to mess it up, but she said something like the opportunity of a lifetime, there's a lifetime on that opportunity, right? Like it's not going to last forever. There's a window.
Sure.
There's a window in which you must act to seize that opportunity. Because the energy, I'm a big believer in energy. You can take the girl out of California. You can't take the California out of the girl.
Sure.
Energy, it could be woo-woo, but it could also just be your own motivation, like your own energy, right?
Sure.
And I think if you're feeling something, strongly now, it's like, that's important to listen to, right? Because that energy, it's going to shift and morph, like as all things do, right?
Yeah. Okay, so in your timeline, you've started the Joanne Weaver Group, and not a great financial time to be starting a new business, but that's when you start. Yeah.
So I am not a morning person, or at least I certainly was not back then.
Okay.
But I was working crazy hours, Skipper. I mean, my God, I was waking up at 7:30 or 8, which for me was like 2 hours before my usual wake up time.
Sure.
I'm working all day. I'm just plugging away, just in my little tiny studio apartment in the East Village, And so I did that for, I guess, probably a year. I mean, I made very little money. I mean, thankfully I had some savings and there isn't a lot of overhead in recruitment. You just basically need a computer and a phone, really.
Sure.
And maybe, LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was tough. And I think I was young enough at the time. I was 30. That I don't think I really understood, okay, the industry is like a dumpster fire. Like it's bad out there. But I think I was just so impervious to that where I'm just like, okay, that's happening over there, but I'm doing my thing.
Right.
I think I was just so dogged about just seeing it through that I was just working these insane hours. But interestingly, and I think this is a good lesson too, is that it wasn't until I went completely off the grid. I went to Burning Man that year.
Oh.
At the time, there was no Wi-Fi, no cellular service. There was nothing out there. Right. And so I had to completely disconnect for 2 weeks, really a week of prep and then a week of the event.
Yeah.
And I came back to New York after that. And it was boom, boom, boom. I made 3 placements within the next month. And, for full-time placements, when it's your own agency, you get to keep all the money, which was also a very awesome thing, which I'd never experienced before. So then I made enough money to, subsist for the year in a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
And I think that's when I was like, okay, like this thing has legs. Like here's the
Yeah.
proof in
Yeah.
the pudding. But I was just like, I just plugged away. I was like, I know I'm good at this. I know I'm good at this. It's always darkest before the dawn. I just got to keep
Right.
going. What else would I do anyways? But it was just, so then I made 3 placements. And then a few years later, and this is also a great lesson that I learned, is sometimes to take the lunch or like take the meeting, maybe when maybe you don't feel like it.
Sure.
But the way that I met Rebecca Levy, my amazing business partner, we've been together for like 14 years now. She's like, we're like each other's brains. We just love working together. It was so great. And it was a mutual candidate. So she was a recruiter at a different agency. We knew somebody in common. And the person that we knew in common was like, hey, Joanne, Rebecca's also an artist. She's a visual artist and she's a recruiter. You're an artist and recruiter. I think you guys should get together. It's kind of like, I don't know, like, wasn't really looking for that. And I'd already branched out and asked other recruiters to partner on things because I never liked to work alone. So I just, I'd like contact all my competitors and they'd be like, what the fuck are you doing contacting me? And I'm just like, let's be friends. Like, let's work on stuff and just form this community, which was great. So I kind of had that going on already. But then when I had lunch with Rebecca, both of us were kind of like, oh, okay, like this is something. And so that just, spawned such a great working relationship. And we laugh about it now because we're like, we're so busy. We're in New York. Like, would we actually take the lunch now?
Right.
Like, probably not. But it was just the right time and the right place. And thank God we took that lunch because it's been such a ride.
Yeah. Well, I think there are a couple lessons in there. One is around the idea of taking a break, right? Even if you feel like things are hectic and chaotic and you don't know where to start or you have too many things to do or whatever the reasoning is there, that the power of taking a break, and maybe Burning Man is your break to take, but it also might be going out for a walk, right? It might be just doing something to disconnect from the work that you have at hand for some set period of time.
Yeah.
We live in a day and age where our phones go with us everywhere, but try to disconnect from the work as much as possible. If you can leave your phone at home, go for a run. That's something that I do to clear my mind sometimes. Something that moves your body in a way that isn't in working mode. And then the second thing is about taking those opportunities, like you said. It's only in hindsight that we can see that we've made these connections and we've done these things that lead us to an outcome. In the present tense, we can't see we can think about the future and we can plan certain things maybe, but we can't see how things will net out. So, I believe to echo something that they talk about in the improv world, I do a lot of yes and. In certain modes, you have to be a sponge in a way to learn and receive and to connect with people. And I think that's one of the things that's painful for people who might be looking for a job right now. I'm looking for a job right now, is to get out of that comfort zone of I go and I do this thing on a regular basis and I do this work. I know how to do this work. I've done this work for X number of years, but I think it's the change part, the shift that feels difficult.
Define the shift for you.
The shift in regular rituals and cadences of things that you do like during the day. So now I find myself in very much networking mode in terms of trying to find some signal in what seems like a sea of noise.
Yeah.
So
totally. No, I completely agree. I think taking a break and stepping away from things is so key. You're using a different part of your brain and a different part of your brain that's more receptive to new ideas and new strategies. I mean, and that can be in the job search, it can be with anything, right? Like when I was making my album's Interstellar Songbook, I was up in Washington Heights with the producer, Andre Fratto, and his process, like he's a composer and like music scorer for film and TV and, albums. And his process, like his baked in process is to step away from the work. So he'll be working on the album, he gets ear fatigue after a while and then he'll step away and he'll watch the news. Like that's how he unwinds, is to watch the news. Right. And he's like, that's when ideas will come. Like, oh, we should put a horn section here. Or like, oh, we should maybe put some reverb on the chorus over here. Just in my work and talking with people that are just so burnt out from the job searching process. I think doing something physical, I think to your point, is great. It gets you out of your mind. The mind can be a dangerous place sometimes and not always the
Can be.
happiest place. Like in a
Sure.
vacuum of information, it tends to go negative. We're just hardwired that way. It's not our fault. That's just how we're built. And then the other part of it is being smart and really thoughtful and targeted in your job search approach. So this is something I really wanted to talk about today, is that there's, I feel like there's a lot of people out there in the industry who are doing this like spray and pray process, right? It's like you're putting your resume out to so many different jobs and just hoping you hear back from somebody. First of all, sending your information to a job posting online or on LinkedIn, like if it's going to a bot, if it's just going someplace digitally, it's basically in most cases going to a black hole. Right. And I think a lot of people are very nervous about AI and technology. Is like a person actually reading this? I'm like, sometimes no, like sometimes it is a bot who's parsing through your resume to see how many keywords actually match up with the job description. But I think it's so important. And this is true of any type of industry, an up industry, down industry, any type of whatever discipline you are in your job. I think it's really important to network and to put your, which it sounds like you're doing a great job of, put your resume and portfolio if you're a designer, into somebody's hands, like a real person's hands, metaphorically, digitally, right? So it's like if you see something on LinkedIn that you like and you're like, oh, okay, great. Like, who do I know that works at that company? Or who do I know that knows somebody that's in a hiring manager position at that company? And then to send your stuff to that person and say, hey, would you do me a favor? People love doing favors for each other, by the way. I think people get really afraid to ask for favors, but I think people really love being in a position to help people out. Can you send my information to them? And here's a little blurb, which talks about, and this is the other piece I really want to get through, is the specificity. So here's why I think I'm a really good fit for this job in particular. And to keep it really short and sweet, long paragraphs outlining all your experience and all the ways you're a good fit, just to me, the recruiter, from looking at, so many emails and, submissions over the years, usually tells me that you're trying to talk your way into it. You're probably not the strongest match for it. So just something really clear and concise, make it easy for them, like good UX in the process, right? A good user experience, like know your user. What do they need? They need to get through your stuff quickly. And then also, I think just in terms of how you're presenting yourself, it's maybe making multiple resumes, right? Like if there might be somebody who, for example, is a really good product designer, but they're also a great researcher. Like those two things can go together really commonly. And they might be applying for both sorts of roles, have a research resume that, lists those titles, like list research first in your titles, have your objective, be very research focused. Just I think it gets lost on people that in order to be called, in order for people to be like, oh, this person could be a good fit, I'm willing to spend the time to get to know them. Your presentation has to be really, really tailored to that particular job and that particular company, and really to take the time to research the company, find out what they're all about, show that you've done your research when you reach out. So you're not going to send as many applications. But I think if you really specify and get very specific with your materials, and you're also networking and putting it in the right people's hands, if you're doing that with like 1/10 as many opportunities as you are with the spray and pray method, your return on investment is going to be so much higher. It's really worth the extra investment, even though it might not feel as efficient. It actually is way more efficient.
For as much as is being made of AI tools, bots, some evil machine out there that is working against people to get a job, I think we still live in a human-centric world. And you've talked about this idea of user experience, user-centered design, human-centered design. And the reality is that we are social creatures. And as you said, people want to help. They do. They may not have enough time in the day to really focus in and, be available to everyone who needs help, but people do want to help. And that's one thing that I've been reminded of in this season of my life where I am working to figure out what my next work is that when I connect with people, up front, there are some people that I haven't chatted with for years, and it's been accidental. It wasn't intentional. I think of them quite fondly. However, there is something that I need to ask them. And so, I make that very clear upfront. I try to make it a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just me asking for something, but it's how can I learn more? How can I uncover something that I'm just not aware of right now? Looking at what I'm doing right now as a sprint of user research, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can learn more about what the market is looking for. I think there's a lot of things that are happening in the design world, this line that's becoming fuzzier between product and design. There are many more things that a designer does that are things that a product person used to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the same for engineers or development, that there are a lot more designers who can do front-end code and maybe even things that are much more involved on the development side. And so being a designer isn't just about one thing, but if you're looking for work as a designer, then you have to be able to focus in and say, these are the things that I do. And so when I look for a role, I look for this instead of saying, oh yeah, there are 20 jobs that are posted on LinkedIn or Indeed or, whatever job board you're looking at, Hiring Cafe, all of these different places, and I'm going to apply to them all.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, well, good luck with that.
Yeah.
You're probably not going to have a very good success rate.
Right. Absolutely. I think niching or, presenting yourself with a niche, and you might have a couple different niches or a few. But I think, presenting that strong niche that is relevant to that job is really important, or just to even have a niche, right? Like people know you as like, oh, like Skipper is really good at, qualitative research or, whatever it might be.
Sure.
I was listening to some like marketing seminar, and this woman was talking about how she's a writer. And she writes all sorts of different copy, long form, short form, UX writing, like hierarchy, headlines. And she really does it all, and I think when you're in this industry, you have to ramp up really quickly and like understand your subject matter really quickly. So she was able to do that, but she was trying to be all things to all people. Yeah. And so as soon as she niched and said, I am a copywriter that focuses in diabetes and diabetes health, all of a sudden her phone was ringing off the hook. Email was, the metaphorical phone ringing off the hook.
Sure.
Because people can latch on to it, right? If you're all things to all people, there's nothing to latch on to.
Right. It's too general.
Yeah. And that can be from a professional sense, but can also be, and I think this is like the fun part of networking and job searching, is also just like letting your personality shine through. Like what makes you unique that maybe is outside of work. Yeah. Right. Like, for example, I'm a crossword puzzle nerd. I love crossword puzzles. I've like gone to a couple of crossword competitions. Not that I'm any good. It's kind of a lark. My boyfriend entered me in like the national crossword championship, but it was just something I love to do. And I met this gal that I was coaching, and she had on her resume that she loves puzzles. And so it's just a really great conversational opener, right? Because people are looking for someone who can do the job and have the skills to do the job, but they're also looking for like a colleague and somebody that they can get along with and that they want to see every day and that they're going to have great conversations with and have that some sort of shared, interest or, some sort of connection, right? Yeah. And I think to your point earlier, yes, we are all human. The human aspect of this cannot be understated or looked past. Like I always like to say, we're all just cave people that like to sit around a fire and tell stories.
Sure.
You know, that's who we are. That's our brains. This modern world, we're not really built for this. And
so we talked about, the idea of niching. We talked about the idea of networking, the importance of networking, especially right now, to cut through some of that noise that I think that we see. What are other ways so if someone comes to you and says, I'm looking for a job, what are the things that so there's the learning more about them and figuring out how are they unique as a person? Like what are their specific skill sets, things like that. What are things that you might suggest or recommend to them to do as a job seeker?
Yeah. So specifically like working with a recruiter, like me. This could be in-house recruiters or also outside, third-party recruiters like me. I think what people don't often understand is that our time is really limited. Sure. And we have to fill the jobs that we have open. Right. So I'll get a lot of people contacting me and being like, hey, can we have a coffee or can we hop on the phone for 30 minutes and you can give me all this basically free advice about my resume and portfolio. And
Sure.
I'm really allergic to that now just because I've been doing this for so long that I think if people are
Sure.
coming to me, like, and it's not their fault. It's just they don't understand how we work. Like I don't get
Sure.
paid unless I
Right.
fill my client's roles. So I need to keep my client and those roles ever
Right.
in the forefront. So
Right.
I will hop on the phone with you if I'm doing a paid coaching call with you. If I don't have anything open for you right now,
For
my
sure.
time is valuable. Let's do that.
Yep.
Or if I do think you could be a good match for the role, that's when I'll hop on the phone and get to know you and do my patented, very thorough screen.
Right.
I think especially in this industry, I think the industry right now is changing for the better. Like we are seeing like
Mm-hmm.
more inbound jobs coming to us as opposed to us running them down, like a lot of
I
outbound.
see.
So we're seeing some nice movement in the industry. So I'm hoping we're getting out of this dark period that we've been in for the last year and a half.
Yeah.
But the fact still remains that there are a lot of people on the market. So there's a
Yep.
large, as you put it, signal to noise ratio.
Yeah.
How do you stand out from the crowd?
Yeah.
So, there's just some very basic things that I see. Like there's low hanging fruit that I see people not taking advantage of, which
Mm.
is they reach out to me, know that my time is limited, create a good
Yep.
UX experience for the person looking at your stuff. So send
Sure.
me all your materials. For
Yep.
God's sake, send me your materials. So, don't just reach out and be like, hey, can I send you my materials? Send me your materials, right?
Right.
I will look at them. If it looks like your background could be good, like I will plumb more deeply and see what you got.
Sure.
So your resume, your portfolio, if that's applicable to you, maybe a couple sentences about, who you are, what you're looking for. Like, are you based in this certain area? Are you looking for hybrid on site or full remote?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of
Mm-hmm.
comp are you looking for? Like all this information you can give up front, like really saves a lot on the back and forth. So
Yeah.
I'm looking for like efficiency in communications, which to me is a signal of professionalism and like having your
Sure.
package like really tight.
Yeah.
If I post a job on LinkedIn, I might be getting like 100, 150 responses, right? Especially in
Sure.
this market, it's way too much to dig through. So
Sure.
if you can help me by giving me a few bullet points about what in your background is specifically a match for this specific job that I have.
Yeah.
And then if you can also, if you have a portfolio, point me, or this could be also for your resume too, if that's not applicable to you, but like point me
Sure.
to certain things in
Yeah.
your portfolio, like send me separate links. Like I usually like to have like one, like your portfolio should be in a single link, right? It should be like
For
a
sure.
Figma presentation or a website or, something
Yep.
like that. Multiple links, no so go.
Yep. Yep.
But in this case, you could say, here's my main link. Here's my main portfolio link.
Yep.
But here's a few things I want to tease out for you. So you can
Yeah.
go straight to these projects and see like what you're asking for. This is what I do. It's
Yeah.
just like really making those outreach communications just really efficient and very targeted.
Yeah.
And then if we do get on the phone, then, just to come prepared,
Yeah.
you can be a little more honest and a little looser with me as a recruiter because, you can kind of tell me like, oh God, my last job was really tough because of X, Y, and Z. I don't
Sure.
want you to go too far, into like all the
Yeah.
drama and the detail, because then I'm going to be like, oh,
Right.
like, what are they going to say to my client? But, they can
Right.
give me like the real poop.
Level of professionalism. Yep.
Yeah. With like a certain kind of deeper level of honesty with me than maybe
Of
they would with the
course.
client.
Of
So I'm
course.
kind of looking for, how you present yourself, how you present your work, how you talk about your work, what were your successes?
Yeah.
Maybe everybody loves a good like hero's journey tale, like Star Wars, like he's on
Sure.
tattooing and everything's going wrong.
Right.
What went wrong? Like what in your job was just not happening and it wasn't
Right.
going your way? Like how did you change it? How did you make it better?
Yeah.
And even like somebody being honest, like there was a guy, Nick Croats, who was working at Policy Genius at the time. And I saw him give a talk about this feature change they were doing. And their hypothesis was that it was going to change their product and have this much more income. And I loved his talk because it talked about how it was a failure. Like this product was a failure. And I
Yeah.
love that he was brave enough to talk about it. And then, of course, he talked about, okay, well, we pulled victory out of the jaws of defeat, and this is how we did it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think having some good stories and really being efficient in your communication around how do you fit this role,
Yeah.
and also just being personable with me, taking time to connect to your interviewer. I think a lot of people get scared and they're like, oh, I'm being judged and I've got to really put on the,
The airs.
the show, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's a real person who's interviewing you with their own fears. Like they might be fearful that you don't like them or that you don't want the job.
Yeah.
Right. So I think taking kind of that like all that power you're giving them and just like, hey, these are two people. These are two cave people sitting around a fire telling stories to each other, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think to add on, not only do you have the job seeker in the situation, right? And there are, unfortunately, many of them right now, some of whom have been in this situation for a significant period of time. But then you also have your clients who are looking to fill roles. So not only are you fielding inquiries from job seekers, but then you have your clients that are asking for very specific things. And there are things that you need to do as a recruiter in order to get clarity on who is the type of person that they're looking for this role. So there's a little bit of back and forth in that client intake. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, it's so funny, Skipper, because when I was little and I was thinking about like, what job do I want to do? And I always thought of sales as being so yucky and like used car salesman. Like that's how I equated sales. And I remember looking at myself in the mirror. I was like, Joanne, if you're ever a salesperson, you really have to rethink your life. And it's so funny because to your point, like what you're bringing up is the fact that a recruiter is a double-sided sales job, right?
Sure.
It's not just a salesperson, but I'm like double salesperson, right? So you're like selling. I mean, that's kind of a gross way of putting it, but you're understanding the person that you're repping, right? So you're understanding, the quote unquote product, if you want to get really kind of technical about it. You're understanding what it is that you're providing to the client, but then you're also understanding what does the client have to provide and what are they all about?
Right.
So, but I really love that piece. I love understanding. And this used to be like the scariest piece for me. Like I used to be so intimidated by clients and, they hold the money bags and I really want to win them over. And, but now it's like, like they have an opportunity for someone to step up into and like, what are they all about? So it's doing a really deep intake on both sides. So it's understanding the client, not just the job, but it's like their culture and how are they growing as a company and what is their vision? And, not every client's a good match, right? Like if it's not the right culture vibe for us, or if they work with us in a certain way that we don't work in that way, then, we can kind of amicably move on. So we take on clients. Yeah, I'd say most of our clients tend to be, startups of varying kind of stages of maturity. Because, I came from the startup world. I love that. Let's build the plane as we're flying it kind of energy. So I just love that. And it takes a very kind of entrepreneurial, interesting person to work well in those environments. So I love working with those people. But, we'll work with Fortune 500s. We'll work with agencies sometimes. So it really runs the gamut. But so it's understanding both sides of the equation really well. And then also understanding the psychology of helping somebody go through change. Right? So it's like change management. Like how can they leave their current job if they're already employed, or if they're not employed? Yeah. How can they shift their mind into this new role? So a lot of it is just kind of reflecting back to them, like what they want and what they say they want, uncovering more under what they say they want. Like, what do they really want? They're saying they want something, but what do they really want? Yeah. So it's a really cool job. Yeah. It's a really cool job. I mean, I think with any job, some days you're kind of like, oh gosh, I just want to get on the Appalachian Trail for 6 months and just, screw it all. But but that's what I like about it, is that I'm so naturally curious about people, connecting with people, what's going to be something that really fulfills them and changes their lives, really. And helping them sometimes see their own self-worth. Sometimes they can't always see it. But a lot of my job sometimes is like being a cheerleader and like giving them confidence and cheering them on. And the job search process can be really lonely and really kind of scary. Yeah. So it's like providing transparency to it and feedback and lots of help and support is just really fulfilling.
Yeah. Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you'd like to get into, some subject matter? We've bounced around quite a lot and I think landed on some really meaty areas. But is there something that you would like to talk about that we haven't covered yet?
What comes up a lot in the job search process, which I'd love to weigh in on, is that I think when people are looking at a role that's a stretch for them, right? They're stretching up into something, or they're switching careers, or
Mm-hmm.
I think with all this, the COVID times that we've had, which was like the needle scratching across the record, like, what?
Right.
Right. And it's like so many people left the city, like the major cities,
Right.
like people like really,
Right.
I think they saw like, oh, there is a different reality. It was like they woke up like, oh,
Yeah.
I can live in the country if I want to, or I can do this or I can do that.
Right.
I think there's this energy of like, oh, maybe I could do something different. But it also comes with a lot of fear, right? Like,
Sure.
it could be that imposter syndrome we're talking about. It could be just, I think a lot of people's core wound is I'm not good enough. And like,
Mm.
can I do
Mm.
this? Right. I think that's super, super common. So I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to bring up something. There's a coach named Tara Moore, Mohr.
Okay.
And
Okay.
she has this book called Playing Big. And it's also this
Okay.
workshop that she does regularly.
Okay.
And so it's mostly about coaching women because she finds that women are just, they know that they're not doing their like they're not fully fulfilled, like they're playing small, right? Like they're not
Sure.
totally growing into their power and like doing what they really, really want to be doing. And maybe that secret thing they don't want to tell anybody about, or even themselves, like it's just so big that they're scared of it. And she
Yeah.
talks about two types of fear.
Okay.
And these are Yiddish phrases. There's yirah
Mm-hmm.
versus pashad.
Mm.
And pashad is like that scary fear. It's like, oh, I'm afraid of the plane crashing or the monster under the bed, or I'm scared of getting laid off, or, things that are kind of
Mm-hmm.
survival.
Mm-hmm.
It's like threat and panic.
Right.
But yirah is a type of fear where there's like a certain, she calls it exhilaration and awe around it.
Okay.
Like,
Okay.
oh, this job scares me, or like changing job scares me, but it's scary in a good way. Right? It's like that fear of like, ooh, who do I have to become in order to step up into this?
Right.
And her advice and my advice is to really lean into that.
Right.
Like that's where growth happens, is when you're uncomfortable.
Right.
And, I think there's many different strategies to become more comfortable. I think, exposure therapy just at its very core, just like practicing and just like sticking your toe in the water, not running away, being kind to yourself, coaching yourself through it, like being your own best friend. Maybe you need to like parent yourself. I think we could all do that.
Yeah.
But it's, like what we were talking about earlier, like the opportunity only has a certain lifetime and there's a certain energy there. Like that door might close. Like what's there for you? I think leaning into that is important.
Well, I think there's a wonderful metaphor that we're just beginning to craft in this conversation, which is as a job seeker or leveling up your career or changing jobs into something else, think about what that experience looks like, right? What does that journey map look like for you and for folks who are coming along this ride with you? So how can you enlist them in the process? And then how can you make it easier for people to join you on this process? So I think there's something here around that notion of how to go about this next activity that you want to do. When you were talking about playing big, I was thinking about that character in Ted Lasso, the Rebecca character. And have you watched the show at all?
I haven't. Everybody tells me I have to watch it. So
okay.
I'm with you though. I'm along for the ride.
So she owns the football team, the main football team, that soccer team that is part of the show. She has a thing when she is feeling less than, or she feels smaller, where she does this thing where she stands in front of a mirror and she makes herself actually bigger. And she opens her mouth like a lion.
Nice.
And it's really fantastic and yet humbling to see this character who is very powerful, is very confident, is a lot of things, who feels less than she does in that moment. And this is the thing that she does to make herself feel bigger so she can have that superhero posture and walk into a room and portray confidence, even if she doesn't feel confident.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think if you don't have those human frailties, you're a psychopath. Right? Like,
sure.
I mean, I think the most confident big people, I mean, you look at like somebody like Tony Robbins, right? Like this, powerhouse. I mean, he's very honest about his own foibles and weaknesses and like where he came from, like very humble beginnings. And No, I think it's so humanizing because it's so true. I mean, and whenever I get nervous, I think, people, when they see me perform on stage, they're kind of like, you get nervous? Like, really? Like, you seem so
Right.
confident up there.
Right.
But no, I think I'm a good actress. I mean, I think
Right.
something that people don't realize is that people don't really know how you feel unless you tell them, because people are just kind
Right.
of in their own heads a lot of the time, not
Yeah.
really thinking about you. So unless you're just like, I am so nervous right now, they probably won't know.
Right.
But just a little tip for when I get nervous, because I will if there's like a different kind of performing situation that's a stretch for me.
Right.
I always think about this phrase, like, when you get nervous, focus on service, which I love,
Interesting.
because it's
Mm-hmm.
like, what do I have to give to this situation?
Right.
Right. And that could be with the job search too, the interview process. It could be anything. It's
Yeah.
like, what are my special gifts that I have to bring to this situation that I want to give to other people?
Right.
Right. So, stage fright, singing is probably the most kind of common stage fright, or, speaking in front of a group.
Sure.
But it's, what do I have to give to people? And when I think about it, and I think sometimes I get nervous when I'm just like, I'm about to give a lot of myself.
Sure.
And that's when I want to give people an experience. I want to have people feel emotions. I want people to be taken on this ride with me in this song. And I want this to be this like very kind of enveloping experience. I want people to forget about their day to day and the grind. I want to have this exalted experience.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, how can I give that to them? And then I'm giving it to myself really too. But I think it's
Right.
focusing on things external to you, because I think anxiety makes you very me focused. So
Yeah.
getting out of that headspace and like, okay, what do I have to give, can be really healing and powerful.
Modeling and focusing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Both of those things.
Yeah.
So I know that we could continue talking, and there's actually a bunch of stuff that we didn't talk about that we talked about in our pre-conversation, but let's go ahead and wrap things up. And the way that we normally wrap things up on the show is we have some closing questions that we ask all of our guests. Joanne, could you share something, maybe a significant lesson that you've learned in your life or your work?
I think talk to people. And I think people want to be talked to more than you think they do. Like, I think our heads are in our phones. We're on our little bubbles.
Sure.
But I think people are really craving connection. I think there's a lot of misery in the world now because we don't have a lot of connection, and we are all in our digital doodads
Sure.
all the time. But it's conversations, even if they're just, kind of in passing, right? Like,
Sure.
oh, I'm talking to a stranger on the train, or I'm telling somebody that, like, I was having a really rough morning last week, and I was walking around Carroll Gardens, and I was just like, I'm just going to like give love bombs to people. And so I just like walked by this woman who was at a cafe, and I was just like, I love your pants. And I did. They were amazing, awesome, like multicolored
Nice.
pants. I was like, I love your pants. And she looked up from her book or her whatever, and she was like, thank you. So it's just, but I think it's like those little moments of connection. It's like you're giving them like energy or giving them love. And I think it's those moments of connection, that could be transient, or they could actually open up into something really big. Like, if I didn't ask those people in the restaurant, those women, like, about their work, like, I would never have started my career as a recruiter.
Yeah.
Right? If I hadn't taken the lunch with Rebecca, I never would have, had this amazing business partner. So I think it's getting out of your shell, the comfort level of like staying in your bubble.
Yeah.
And just engaging with the world around you, even if it might feel scary or you don't know how you're going to be received. Like, what's the worst that can happen? The person's just like, ugh, I'd rather not talk to you. Like, okay. Doesn't mean that I'm a terrible person. It just means like, oh, we tried to connect. It didn't work.
Right.
But I think that's why I love the show called Alone, where these people are like living solo in the wilderness, just, trying to survive for as long as they can by hunting and trapping and, building fires. And if, the last one standing wins like $1 million. But I love that, because it's like, it's completely devoid of technology, and they're just with themselves. And they always have these like incredible, like life realizations out there doing nothing. But that's how we lived for millions of years. Like, that's how we're hardwired. So, yeah.
So be authentic about the way that you connect, it sounds like you're saying, and, reach out, because as you said, I think a lot of us, we don't get enough of it in our day to day.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is there something that you're watching or you're reading or listening to that's really exciting for you right now that you would recommend to listeners?
So I just mentioned that show Alone. And
Yeah.
actually, a very good friend of mine, Dan Bree, was their executive producer for quite a few seasons. So he would give me the skinny on all the contestants afterwards. So that was really fun.
Nice.
So I just love that show. It's like, kind of man, woman against nature, not against nature. They're really kind of living with nature. It's just fascinating. And they have to record everything. And it's just, I love that.
Yeah.
And then I actually just finished listening to an 18-hour audiobook. It was a biography on a certain 80s/90s pop sensation, which I'm not going to actually say who it is.
Okay.
And the reason why I'm excited about it is that I've basically had like creative writer's block and writing my own music for a year.
Okay.
And so I've been thinking about putting up this show, which is kind of a cabaret show about this person's music and life. And I've always had a very strong connection to him.
Okay.
We actually sing in the same key, which is pretty rare because he's like a high baritone and I'm, but I just really, I don't know, I've just always loved him and always just felt very connected to him, like spiritually in some way, kind of weirdly.
Okay.
So I just finished listening to a book about his life and I'm starting the planning process of putting up a show about him.
Do it.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yet I know this is not, that energy is not going to last forever, right? Like
no,
it's
you got to take advantage of it.
Yep.
These seasons come and go. And I think that's something we don't always realize.
Totally.
So if you were unexpectedly granted a day off with unlimited resources and you could defy the constraints of time and space, what would you do?
So I like that you use the word space. So that got me thinking big, Skipper.
Nice.
Because there's no constraints, I would love, and this harks back to something I said earlier, like I'd love to zip through space. I'd love to be in space. I want to see what's out there. I know I spoke about the golden record.
Yeah.
They sent it aboard Voyager 1 and 2 back in 1977. And the golden record is basically, it's sounds of Earth, it's greetings in 55 languages. And it's
a record on vinyl, right?
No, I think that, what is it made out of? It's, I think it's like some like really, very long lasting metal of some sort.
Oh, maybe golden record. Sure.
Yeah. The golden record. And it also has like instructions on how to play it and how long it's been out there in space, where Earth is located.
Yeah.
And then there's this hand carved inscription that says, "To the makers of music, all worlds, all times." And it's built to last between 1 and 5 billion years. So I just, that just blows my mind that like NASA, like we have like this huge, like multi-billion-dollar national organization that took the time, like they think it's important to put this out in space. And that to me signifies hope. Like there's hope, like there's something else out there. I would love to know, like, where is this other life? Is it way advanced? Is it, billions of years behind us? Is it single cell organisms? Like, I would just love to know what's out there because I feel like that would just unlock the secrets of life in the universe. And I'm just fascinated by that stuff.
Yeah. That 100%. I mean, most people have not gone beyond the lower atmosphere, right? In our travels and everyday life. So space would be amazing.
Yeah.
What's one thing that you think will be true, that you either think will be true or you hope will be true in a year?
So we briefly touched on AI in our conversation.
Yeah.
I think AI is going to completely change the face of our society in ways that I personally can't fathom. I don't know if anybody can at this point. I'm sure there's people that are further along in this thought process than me, but I think that's going to change certainly our industry. Like, is AI going to take over making like, kind of production level wireframes? Certainly the writing of ChatGPT is not great yet, but is that going to improve? Like, I think
it's getting better.
Yeah. And I think, things are going to improve exponentially over time. So I think that's going to be an explosion of kind of seismic proportions that I don't think we know yet.
Yeah.
And then, I think in kind of a smaller container, I think we're going to be out of this job slump. I really hope that's a hope. That's a hope, but also a prediction. Look, I've been through this and I'm sure you have too. It's like, going through multiple like highs and lows in this industry. 2001 was a super slump. 2008 was a super slump. 2022 was amazing. I mean, almost too amazing. Companies overhired. And that's why we had a lot of layoffs after that. But I mean, God, mid-level designers normally make like 140. They were making like 200, 220. And like, I'd have clients take me aside and be like, should I be looking for a job right now? Like, directors would be like, hey, like, I think I'm making the same as like a mid-level designer. Like, this is not so cool.
That's right.
So I think we're going to have an upswing. It feels like it. Yeah. It feels like we're on the bottom part of the upper curve. So, yeah.
Well, I've definitely heard from a lot of people who work for companies and they've done their books for the first 3 quarters, and now it seems like they have a surplus. So I think part of seeing maybe some more of these job listings and more of this interest is because companies are saying, oh, we do have some more money to spend for the rest of the year. So contract, full-time, et cetera. Yeah. I think some of that is already beginning to burble to the surface. So I hope so.
I like that word, burble.
So Joanne, for people who want to find out more about you, your work, we've talked about a few things during the show, and we'll link to them, in the sequence of our conversation. But where can they find additional information about you?
Yeah. So our company website is horrendously old. So apologies in advance for hurting your eyeballs. We're in the process of a redesign right now, but as you know, they take a long time. But the website is Joanne Weaver Group, JoanneWeav as in Victor, ER group.com. Mm-hmm. If you want to catch some Design Unfiltered talks, which is the live stream that I do with 2 other UX design recruiters, Jared Treadley and Erica Fortgang. We do that every other Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. We actually just had one a couple days ago, so it'll be in 2 weeks. You can go on LinkedIn and search for #Design Unfiltered. Okay. And you can also link in with me. Anybody out there listening, if you're in my industry, or even if you're not, you just want to connect and you liked this podcast, you can link in with me. You have to use my email, which is Joanne at Joanne Weaver Group. If you're looking for a job within UX, product design, product management, research, or content design, you can also send me your materials there as well.
Yeah. Okay.
And then on Spotify, you can search for Joanne Weaver or Broanne, which is Broanne.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Joanne. I really appreciate your time and attention today. This conversation I've learned so much just from the hour or so that we've been recording. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It was so fun.
And thank you for listening to the How This Works show. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. As we continue through our second season, it would mean a lot if you shared the show with just one other person and let them know why they should listen. You can find us online at howthisworks.show. That's 4 words with no dashes. Again, that's howthisworks.show. We're also active on a variety of social media platforms. I hope you gained some valuable insights from today's conversation with Joanne. I certainly did. So, stay curious, and we'll talk again soon.
So I was working with a coach, and a lot of the things we were working on was how do I incorporate my creative life with my professional life and really have a holistic whole. And so I took a little bit of a risk, and I posted a photo of myself from a prohibition party night that I had done. So I was singing up here upstate at this prohibition party. So all the music we had chosen was like 1920 to 1933. Like it was just this really fun, everybody's dressed up. Like we were all pretending it was really 1933, the repeal of prohibition. And so I have this great photo of me in this 20s flapper outfit and this, cigarette holder with my friend Michael. And so I posted it on LinkedIn, like, hey, everybody, here's my other, not so secret life. And it got a lot of great feedback and like way more likes than when I send an actual, like when I post a job description.
Sure. Sure.
So it's like the human element, right? It's like, oh, I'm curious about like what makes you you, which is really interesting because that's something that I coach people that we represent a lot. Like, hey, like let your individuality shine, like let people know who you are.
Right.
So I'm still working on it. Like it's still a work in progress, but I think there's no way that I can separate my creative self from my professional self just because so much of, what we do is in the creative field. So I think being a creative person allows me to connect to creative people just easier. It gives me a little bit of social proof. Like, hey, I get it. Like I understand like how vulnerable and how raw being a designer or an artist can be. And so it just creates much richer conversations and a deeper connection.
Yeah. That's a great story. And it's a good reminder that behind every job, we are whole people, right? There's a work life and then there's also the home life. And so there are many things that we do. Sometimes they support each other and sometimes they're so opposite. So I think that's a really excellent reminder.